Welcome back to Loyalty Leaders Podcast. I'm David Feldman, Chair of Loyalty Summit, and today we are going to be talking about Southwest Airlines. And I am joined by a very special guest, Gary Leff, who should be familiar to most people, author of View from the Wing, and highly regarded industry expert, and regular Southwest customer over many years as well. Gary, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave. Good to chat with you about all the things going on in the world right now.
So in terms of, I did just, lightheartedly make a comment about Southwest customer. You have over many years, been a very regular Southwest customer. So you're pretty intimately familiar with the product.
Yeah. So, I live in Austin. I moved here 11 years ago, and Southwest is the largest carrier in Austin. I have held status with Southwest. I've held, companion pass with Southwest. I found, in many ways, they've really appealed to me. It has long been a very sort of basic product, but their employees are generally happy to be there. They don't mind being at work. One of the things that I like, frankly, their boarding process isn't my ideal. I don't love queuing up early. I like to sit in a lounge that Southwest doesn't have. I work until the last minute and I board a little bit later. But Southwest, there's not really any fight for the most part for overhead bin space because they've had free check bags, so people don't try to carry everything on. If you're booking late or you're changing flights, as I'm wont to do, the best seats aren't completely taken. I find that on other major carriers with who have seat assignments and sell seat assignments, it may be the case that on flights that I want to buy, I've got to look at that seat map because even several weeks out, I might not be able to get access to an extra legroom aisle seat that I want, right? Whereas all the best seats on Southwest are still available up until the moment that they're boarding the aircraft, except for through passengers who may have a few hour head start on me. And so if I really care, I could pay up at the airport for earlier boarding, and I've many times gotten the unlimited legroom exit row seat, but even just a regular aisle is good because their basic legroom on the 737 800s has been top of the industry for regular coach. Now all of that is changing, right? So even their standard coach seats on those planes are going to have less leg room to make room for extra leg room in their premium seats. But they're not going all the way with premium. They're not going to allow you to pay to block that middle seat. They're not going to have a true first class. But their basic product is going to be a little bit less comfortable than it was. Obviously,
yeah. I think. I was going to say, in terms of you mentioned about happy crew. I think that's one of the things that's always struck out to me about. To me, there's three things that really stuck out about Southwest over the years. Number one is obviously the boarding process, and everybody who's ever encountered Southwest is familiar with it. And generally speaking, you either love it or you hate it. I'm kind of like you. I'm kind of mixed. I'm not particularly a fan, but it's not the end of the world either. And as you say, there can be some benefits. You make a last-minute flight change, for example. I know you hold top status on American Airlines, for example, and have for many years, as I have. One of the issues, if you do a same-day change at the last moment, guess what? You're probably down the back of the plane, maybe in a middle seat, because you're choosing to just get home as opposed to that nice seat reservation that you've had for some time. Southwest, you can make a last-minute same-day flight change, and as you say, hey, if you have you could buy up to earlier boarding in many cases and still get a really front aisle seat if that's what's important to you. But the other thing that's really stuck out to me, obviously, free bags has been sort of their raison d'etre, in terms of their brand image. Like you, I imagine, I don't particularly check bags very often. Most business travelers, don't check bags very often. But that said, everybody associates bags fly free with Southwest. But the third thing that's always stuck out to me has been the crew. They seem genuinely happy to be there, whether it's the flight crew or the cabin crew. And even when things go wrong, whether we're talking about gate agents or the agents on the phone, because you need a letter for your insurance because, you had an unexpected overnight stay because of weather or something like that. It's very hard to get mad at Southwest when things go wrong because everybody is just so gosh darn nice. I wonder, though, the airline is clearly going through a time of turmoil right now. They just had, a huge amount of layoffs. I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's the first time in their history. Obviously morale is at risk with this huge change, for better or for worse, within the airline. Do you think that no one ever talks about that. It doesn't appear as a number on a spreadsheet, but do you think that is as much danger as hurting the brand image as anything else?
Well, look, yeah, so they already, I think, morale wasn't in the place that it was. And, look, and some of that comes from the December 22 meltdowns. Some of it comes from, frankly, just the fact that, 1 in 5 Southwest employees is new since the pandemic. There's been so much turnover. And when Elliott Management was acquiring their stake and looking to make big changes at the airline, there was no groundswell from employees sort of standing up for current management the way we've seen at some carriers, like Delta when U.S. Airways tried to acquire them 17 years ago. They had that employee keep Delta my Delta campaign. We didn't see that with Southwest. And even before the layoffs, 1,700 layoffs of non-union employees, the airline had announced that they were ending employee rallies, reducing the investment in employee morale that they've been making for many years. And maybe they weren't getting the right amount of value out of that, but they weren't replacing it with anything else. And the messaging around all of these things has been, well, we've got to tweak our financial performance for a company that's like making money but not as much as they should be. We're cutting back on our employees and we're laying people off to improve the financial metrics, which is just a terrible messaging around what you're trying to do. And look, Southwest was already had an employment freeze, a hiring freeze. And so what they did in terms of their layoffs was 12 to 18 months of where they would have gotten to just through natural attrition. And so it's not as though what they're generating is a $300 million a year annual savings. It's kind of front loading a year's worth of savings once, and then there's a cost associated with that. And so I do think that there's an impact to all of these changes that continues to undercut the unique selling proposition of the carrier. And so I think it's and what happens then is that you say, okay, now Southwest has always done things differently. They've had this brand, it's a different experience. And historically, they earned investors a stronger return because of it, and they were consistently profitable. And they are no longer different. You wouldn't expect them to have an earnings multiple in their valuation. It may be the case that they had maxed out their model. There's only so much they can do without partners with only 737s, right? Maybe that they've gotten as much value as they could have out of that model, but making themselves more like, JetBlue and American may not be the best way to financially outperform the industry. And then when you compare themselves to these other carriers, you say, okay, they don't have seatback entertainment. They don't have free Wi-Fi. In fact, in my experience, their Wi-Fi is the worst in the industry, of course, other than Frontier that doesn't have it. All right, but it doesn't work as well as on other carriers, whether ones that charge or that make it free. Some planes have USB power. Not all of them do. They don't have standard outlets. They don't have a first class. They don't have lounges. They don't have hot meals on board. All of the things that differentiate product, they want to be more differentiated, but they're offering something that's like a little bit less than. So they're going to go up against airlines and say, now we're basically just competing on schedule and price. You're not choosing us because of the soft elements, and so we got to compete on fare, but we're also no longer as low cost as we used to be. Right, labor costs have gone up a lot, since the pandemic there. So, how are we going to compete with, Spirit, who's lower cost than we are? I mean, for all their troubles, they even have a more differentiated product with the opportunity to buy something more premium than what Southwest is offering, often at a good price, though not always. So I think they're going to struggle as a customer. I'm thinking, how do I choose them? And they say, okay, what's the original way that airlines post-deregulation differentiated what seems to be a commodity product, a seat that takes you from one place to another? And that was their frequent flyer program. That was the innovation and loyalty, was to say, here is a commodity product, but we're going to create a brand preference. So, what has the Southwest Rapid Rewards program done? Now, it's certainly not as strong, even going into all of these changes, as it was. They've devalued, the value of their points have devalued 43% in 12 years. So the points just aren't providing as much. There's not as much value back to the customer. What Southwest does have is Companion Pass. It's still an incredibly valuable, motivating tool. The ability to bring someone with you at no extra cost. Maybe you'll have a free seat that you can extend that. Maybe you won't anymore. But in terms of the actual fare, whether you're redeeming points or on a paid ticket, you can do that with a designated person for the whole year. That's really very valuable and motivating. And and a decade ago, I thought, well, gee, maybe this is too valuable, and they're going to eventually get rid of it. Except that they found that it was a real motivator for credit card acquisition as well as a driver of spend. Frankly, it's the only reason why you would want to put spend on a Southwest Airlines co-brand credit card. First, because their points are perhaps not worth as much as some competitors on a one-to-one basis for what you're getting, but also because you can get more Southwest Airlines points like with other Chase cards and transfer them if you really wanted to, right? And you're getting less value than just booking through a Chase Sapphire Reserve points through their portal, where you're getting a penny and a half a piece, right? You're going to give up 20% of the value to transfer your points to Southwest and redeem for Southwest tickets. So why do you spend? You get fewer points on their cards most of the time than on alternative Chase products, because you want those points to count to Companion Pass. So that is actually very valuable. But for everyone who's not chasing Companion Pass, I just don't see the loyalty program as a significant driver. Now, they will say that the move to offer basic economy fares, I think it makes a certain amount of sense once they're making other changes that they're being forced to make. They're reducing the points earning on basic economy. They're getting rid of checked bags, free from most of their fares. But Southwest Airlines, part of that model that they've maxed out is this idea of folks just going to their website and buying tickets. Because if you are in Houston or Dallas or Chicago or Denver, right, to do that. But if you are in one of the markets that they serve without such a particularly strong presence, you don't necessarily know top of mind, I need to go visit Southwest in order to see what their fares look like. So they tend to carry passengers on these routes heavily skewed towards folks originating in their larger or hub cities, right? And it much lighter traffic from their outstations, rather than having closer to an even balance. And in order to chase more passengers and be relevant to consumers, they need to be on Expedia, which they have done a deal to be on Google Flights. They're on Kayak now. And I think that is something that they need to do. But once they do that, they all of a sudden look more expensive unless they unbundle, right? And so they want to offer the least amount possible to compete against basic economy fares. So they have their basic economy, and there are other incentives to do that too. Look, Southwest Airlines is leaving perhaps $100 million tax benefit on the table when they are not unbundling check bag fees, because domestic airfares are subject to a 7.5% excise tax. Right? And Southwest has said that check bag fees might generate $1.5 billion in revenue. They thought 6 months ago they were saying, but it would cost them 1.8 billion, right, in revenue to do it. Maybe that's not true anymore as they go on to some of these other sites to distribute their fares. But if you take that and you assume, okay, well, they're not entirely a domestic operation, but they're still potentially losing that $100 million of the amount of money they collect that gets to go onto the federal government that other airlines don't do, because they are stripping money out of the total amounts paid by the passenger and calling those ancillary fees. And so, look, any customer, mad at the airlines over check bag fees or seat fees really ought to be calling up their Congress member and say, why are you creating massive incentives for the airlines to do this, right? With the differential tax treatment. But they're leaving this tax benefit on the table. They need to look competitive to attract these customers. So I get it. But it also does give up the brand of who they are, and they don't have the commensurate product to compete with either. So they're in a really difficult position. And they say, gosh, we're they used to market, their huge idea was transparency. And that was the no change fees. That was the no check bag fees. And during the pandemic, other airlines matched, led by United. And Scott Kirby said Southwest had this huge advantage in no change fees. People would buy their tickets, right? Because they weren't worried. They could keep the credit. And at the time, in response, Southwest said, okay, we're going to go one step further. The credits that you get when you cancel now no longer expire. And that's going to be a real comfort for people to be able to have confidence in buying our tickets, especially like the people who don't travel Southwest all the time, where they would have confidence in using them in 12 months. They're not going to expire, so they'll be able to use it eventually. And by the way, we don't see a huge cost in doing that after the first few months. Right now, they're going to expire, in 6 or 12 months, depending on the fare type. And that is giving up what they described as their advantage, like the reason people might book with them. And so they become just like any other airline, only less than. And that's not a huge value proposition for the customer at this moment, when people seem to demand greater differentiation than ever. So other than, look, it's what their activist investors demanded. We get that. They put board members in place, likely to sort of say that this is what they want. The company was, the investors were right, as many observers were, that Southwest had lost its edge. A lot of changes probably needed to be made. They were slow to respond to changing customer demands. They, as I said earlier, I think they maybe have maxed out their model and weren't doing much about it. But there wasn't an obvious solution either for what they were going to do. The distribution problem would have been solved for them had the Biden administration rule on fee disclosure been gone into effect, right? Because the federal government was going to require airlines to all airline pricing to be displayed with inclusive of fees like a check bag fee, like a carry-on fee. And that was going to make Southwest appear competitive. It was going to reduce the competitive value of basic economy. And that meant that Southwest would have had an easier time going to online travel agencies, distributing their fares, gaining these customers without making other changes. And that rule was enjoined by the Fifth Circuit. There was a change in administration, maybe less inclined to fight for that rule, or come up with a new one that might pass muster in the courts. And so they find themselves in this position. And what do? I mean, the case that something was wrong at Southwest, that they were top heavy, right? Costs had gone up. We get that. But the what do you do was the hard thing. Elliott didn't seem to have a great what do you do that clearly differentiates them. And certainly that doesn't bring them back to the idea that they could be overperforming the industry, right? In terms of their growth and revenue premiums and just how valuable they are as a company. But instead, what do we see them doing? We see them selling aircraft. We see them selling and leasing them back, basically borrowing money to fund stock buybacks, which hasn't worked out well for American Airlines. In fact, recently, after the first quarter earnings call to employees, we heard CEO Robert Isom at American complaining about the high debt levels that they went into the pandemic with. Well, he was president of the airline, right? I mean, predecessor did that. I don't know, but it didn't work out super well there. The financialization of Southwest doesn't necessarily work out well here either. I just, as a customer, I'm not more inclined to book with them than I used to be. I'm certainly not more inclined to spend more for them than I used to be. So I'm not sure that is really where they ultimately want to wind up.
So just to recap for those listeners that might not be either US based or perhaps haven't quite caught up on the news over the last 36 hours or so. Although that said, the signs have been there for some time for those of us that are in the industry. But basically, just to give everybody the background here, is Southwest has announced, and correct me if I'm getting this wrong, Gary, but Southwest has announced no longer will bags be free across the board. It will now be a function, just like at every other airline, of some fares include bags, and if you have elite status, it includes bags, but that's the same to every other airline.
And their
They're
co-brand credit card, right? They think they're going to get some co-brand acquisition out of it.
Sure, but in fairness, at all the other airlines, if you have the co-brand credit card, you get free check bags too. So again, and I think everything we're going to talk about here comes back to that's great, but all your competitors already do that. And so what we're talking about is there's issues of change fees, they're introducing basic economy, no longer are bags flying free. As you say, they've been watering down the value of the points value in the loyalty program for some time. Although that said, every other airline has been doing that too. And we know to some degree they can get away with it because most people, unlike us and points and miles aficionados, most people don't do the math. They have some points in their account. They go to book a flight. Oh, okay, I can do it on points. Great. We know it's kind of as simple as that for most leisure travelers. But what we have now, from certainly from what I see, and jump in if you feel differently or are getting this wrong, is the commoditization of the product. Whereas they had this brand halo, and it was always interesting to me. I know I talked about the crew always being in a good mood and all the rest of it, but they also had this brand halo of being a low fare airline, and that's existed for decades. In my experience, they're typically not often the cheapest or really competitive on price often at all. Now, sometimes they're the only airline that's flying the most convenient schedule and route, perhaps the only non-stop between two ports, like you say, perhaps the biggest domestic carrier in your local hub. Those things do matter to consumers in terms of which airline am I going to choose to fly, which is convenient for me, which is going to have me home in time, or I can leave at a convenient time to not miss family events or something like that. Those things do matter. Bags, I think, disproportionately affect leisure travelers. I mean, most business travelers don't check bags. So therefore, or if they do, they already have a credit card, or they already have elite status, or they're already on a business fare, or they can expense it. So whether you're charging bag fees or not, it kind of really doesn't impact business travelers and especially managed corporate travelers. It does disproportionately affect leisure travelers. Now, you could argue, like you say, well, okay, you were kind of paying for bags, but it was kind of bundled in the price. And yes, I think most people could kind of get their head around that concept, perhaps. But here's something that strikes me, Gary, in the last 36 hours: the social media backlash. I don't think I have ever seen anything like this in the industry before. Now, previously, when we've seen backlashes against major changes at major carriers, particularly with loyalty programs, it's been from points and miles aficionados or, genuine, regular, frequent flyers. It hasn't been from what I would call the average Joe. But tell me if you're thinking differently over the last day, what we've been seeing. But I am seeing horrendous negative sentiment on social media from what I would call average Joes.
So that's right. I mean, we've seen huge backlash against changes, even enough that has caused rethinking of those changes, right? So a year and a half ago, Delta announced huge changes to their elite program and lounge access. So that was very focused on those hardcore customers that pay attention. The backlash was enough; it scared them into backing off of the changes. And I thought at the time they would make some incremental moves to reinstituting them. But a year later, we didn't see that for the 2025 program year. We obviously, they don't disclose the data, but I mean, clearly, they were seeing an effect on their co-brand partner side with, card retention, spend, that sort of thing, and enough that they were quickly turned around, and not just by the sentiment. But absolutely here, it's something that offends people because Southwest was the small d democratic carrier, right, that spoke to and was branded as friendly for that average traveler. I mean, virtually all the seats were the same. Everyone had the same shot at it because you have the license to hunt when you board. They're not nickel and diming you for changes and for bags. Maybe they would have been a little bit more expensive, but maybe you didn't even know that because you went to their website to see the pricing and didn't compare it.
Yeah.
And so it does fundamentally undermine the perception of their value proposition. And frankly, it also may wind up costing them a tremendous amount of their efficiency. Because Southwest carries a lot more bags than anyone, right? I mean, everyone checks bags because it doesn't cost them anything, which means they're not carrying everything that they own onto the plane, which means that you don't have the same fight for overhead bin space on every other plane. Usually, I rarely see Southwest flights that are gate checking bags, even when they're completely full. And it's a terrible customer experience, but it's also something that delays flights, right? And gate checking, as well as all the carry-ons, slows down boarding. And they've said that they're desperate to reduce their turn times, and they're already low relative to others, in order to have more efficient use of their aircraft. Right, they're going to increase their seat capacity just through utilization, but they may experience the exact opposite as they get rid of the reason to, with seat assignments, the reason to line up early, other than access to overhead bin space. They get rid of the thing that makes boarding go so smoothly. Right now, boarding takes longer, and they're not going to be as efficient as or they're going to be more delayed. And by the way, Southwest has done a great job operationally. The last several months, they've been at the top of the industry in terms of their on-time performance, even with shorter turn times. And that is crucial to, attracting and retaining customers, but also, operating a schedule that efficiently utilizes aircraft at times people want to fly. You can't just say, okay, everything takes us 15 minutes longer, so we push our schedules out 15 minutes. People don't necessarily buy the flight after 9 p.m. that you're now scheduling at 9:20 or 9:30. And so you're losing ticket sales too. And by the way, it's more expensive in terms of your labor costs to extend your day to operate the same flights. So, there's going to be, detriment to the customer experience, challenges on scheduling, just operational headaches that come from all of this too. They have the huge benefit with, the bags fly free. That's not just the marketing benefit, not just attracting customers, not just earning a revenue premium for their seats. So, everywhere you look, it's like, it doesn't look like they're doing anything that gets them out of the hurdle. They become closer to what everyone else does, but less than. And look, even if you say, okay, maybe you say everyone's devalued their miles, but I can use Advantage or Mileage Plus or Mileage Plan miles, and even True Blue points to travel on foreign partners, to take that European cruise and go in business class. And that's not just something for the experts. It's something that people aspire to, that's motivating. As I say, all Southwest really has is like companion pass there. And so it's everything that they're doing is the same but less than. We're just getting rid of the things that actually appeal to customers. But they're in capitulating to their activist investor. They put people on the board who said, I used to work at an airline that did this, and of course it made sense to us, so you should do that. And and many of the senior leaders at Southwest have stepped down. Right, Tammy Romo, the CFO, is leaving. Ryan Green, who had been chief commercial officer, who was their chief transformation officer, who had laid out a case against check bag fees, is leaving. But who's left? Like their CEO, and he's becoming the face of the changes that 6 months ago he said will never happen. And so, like, where is the even as a messenger, where does the CEO have credibility with the customers? Where is he even seen as the decision maker at this point? I just don't see where they go from here.
And I think that's the challenge, isn't it? I mean, and we keep sort of saying, you use the term, I think you said, same as, but less than, when we're talking about the competitors. I mean, the commoditization of the product, and you could argue, you could certainly argue from a commercial side, okay, fine, you take that as it is, and maybe that's a fair commercial strategy. But, where's the meaningful elite status beyond Companion Pass? You're right, they do have Companion Pass, and that we should give them credit there. But where are the lounges? Where's the access to global partners? Like you say, your average leisure flyer that flies once a year, the reality is they may never have enough miles on American or United or Delta, to fly business class, to Paris or something like that. But the truth of the matter is they aspire to that. And that's what motivates them to join the program, to perhaps get the co-brand card, to perhaps consolidate their share of wallet onto one carrier, or keep choosing one carrier year after year after year, because they dream of that. Now we know from the data that most people redeem their miles for, a coach flight to Wichita for Thanksgiving to see grandma, and that's fine. But we know that what motivates them is the possibility of the aspirational reward. And, Southwest doesn't have that. Now, if they want to get there, it seems to me that, what they need to start laying out, those investment plans over the forward 5-10 years, to be saying, hey, you know what? Yes, we're making all these changes, but, we have a vision for the new Southwest, and it's going to take us a little bit to get there, but this is where we're going to be. And we're not hearing that conversation. I mean, are you hearing that in backroom talk?
No, look, I mean, there had been some experimentation with, lounge access, testing with customers of their co-brand, giving out priority passes, right? So, they've looked at some of these things, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of appetite for capital expense. I mean, in fact, the opposite is the case. Right? I mean, it looks like that's the direction that they're, activist investors who've taken for, half the board seats, minus one, have been pushing for, rolling back capital spend. They're selling and financing aircraft, right, rather than taking ownership, these sort of things. So I don't see the product investment. There's certainly not an articulation of how they're going to improve the product to compete on that basis. They still are the largest domestic carrier that is meaningful, but saying our route and schedule is the product didn't work particularly well for Vasiraj and American Airlines. It didn't work well for American. I mean, copying the model that American of late has said hasn't been enough. American is saying they need to go more premium, and they do, because they have high costs, right? Yep. So in order to earn a return, they need to have above industry revenue, and so that needs to appeal to customers. But Southwest isn't an entirely dissimilar situation, although their costs are lower than Americans. And so, no, we don't hear that. But they have a strong route network, but they haven't explained how they're going to compete on schedule and price. And it's not just that they have devalued the loyalty program in the past to get to where they are today, but concomitant with their announcements of basic economy and checked bag fees was an announcement about a change to award pricing. Whereas it has been the case that their points are basically fixed value against whatever the fare is. And that's been the case for about the last 7 years. There had been some variation based on fare type before that. But instead, they're saying that at peak demand times, the points are going to be worth less against the fare, right, rather than equivalent value, and that they may give more value in the lowest demand times. So the times where you rely on your points the most because fares are expensive, your points are going to become worth just less valuable. They're less useful. So when you need the most. So I would push back a little bit and saying, well, everyone's devalued. I'm saying they're taking it a step further. At least they've said, no, they haven't given us the data yet, and they never announced that in their program in advance. But they haven't given us the data to evaluate just how bad. But they did include with that announcement the suggestion that it's likely their points will be worth less as well.
So we're coming up on time, Gary, and there's been so much to sort of discuss and delve into. I think the picture of that this is a massive change. It's certainly not being well received. There's lots of questions about how they're going to compete, post commoditizing the product with other airlines, given that they seem to be throwing away all their competitive advantage aspects and wanting to compete head to head with an inferior product. And as you say, sort of certainly no announcements in terms of a roadmap to improve that going forward. For someone who's currently a Southwest flyer, or an occasional Southwest flyer, who is hearing all this in the last day and a half, and has been, by the time this goes to air, it'll be the last week, and they're thinking, what do I do? Should I start looking at another airline? What's your advice to them?
Well, look, I mean, if you're at A-list preferred, they're top tier elite, you'll be able to confirm extra legroom seats soon. You may like that better than what you've had, because they haven't had extra legroom. Their regular A-list, will still get a free check bag, and at check-in, maybe extra legroom will be available. My guess is it will be most of the time, because they're talking about a third of the seats on the aircraft having extra legroom. That's a lot to sell. Now, maybe it'll be extra legroom middles that are available, but right, there may be some benefit for the regular Southwest flyer that they'll enjoy that trade off with some of these things. I would say that the biggest hit's going to be for the person that is not already earning status with Southwest. They are going to be the ones that are the most worse off. So, for somebody who is a 5-6 times a year Southwest flyer, you fly them if you have to.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the brand positioning that they want to have. It's not the brand positioning they've ever had. So normally when you make announcements of changes that customers aren't going to like, you sort of paint a vision for the upside and the positive things that you're also doing. Saying like we understand that not everyone is going to love every element of this, but we are paying attention. This is an airline that in their communications has always given customer a capital C, right? So they've been so focused on the customer. To say, okay, what is there's just no focus on the customer here. There's no narrative for the customer about anything that's positive, anything that makes the customer better off. And that's the message, is that they don't even see the vision for how they're improving things for the customer. And it's a very strange thing to have an airline that is still making money, right? Make such wholesale changes without focus or discussion of customer benefit or even a nod to it. It's just around, yeah, we know you're going to hate this, but we're doing it because we think we're going to optimize financial performance, i.e., get more out of you.
Yeah. Well, Gary, thank you so much for your insights. I have a feeling this is going to be a case of watch this space, and I'm absolutely sure we're going to come back to this conversation in a period of time. I mean, I think I think we probably at this point, they've put everything out on the table. I think we need to let the dust settle. I don't imagine, your crystal ball is as good as mine, but I don't imagine they're going to be reacting to negative sentiment and going, oh, sorry, we offended you, we're going to pull back on this. I mean, they seem to be in crisis mode, and they're doing, like you say, they're responding to the activist investor push here. So I don't see any impetus for, to me, it feels like they're ripping the Band-Aid off, and they're just like, we know this is bad, we know you're not going to like it, but this is the direction going forward, and we're doing this. That seems to be the feeling.
I hate how negative I am in this conversation. Genuinely, right?
Sure.
So I actually love the Southwest brand. I love the history. I live in Texas. It's so rich and it's so storied, and so I hate to see this. And I still love the people. I love they have historically done just a wonderful job of selecting for great people on board aircraft who are happy to be there, who are just having fun, and despite everything, still, you get people on planes who have fun doing it, and you love to see it, and you want to see that continue. And so, I hope they find a way to deliver for customers. I don't think what they're doing is long-term going to be great for shareholders. It hasn't been great so far for Elliott, since they've made their investment, right? They haven't had positive returns since investing in Southwest. And frankly, the data on stock buybacks is that there may be a short-term bump, or at least benefits anyone selling into the buyback, but that there isn't a discernible benefit over time. I don't see the path. I hope they have one that they haven't shared yet, or they figure one out, because there's got to be a way to take the assets that they have and the legacy that they have, and deliver for customers in a way that's going to be great for their bottom line as well. And I really want to see that.
Gary, thank you so much for your insights. We'll definitely come back to this conversation, and appreciate you joining. Gary Leff, thank you so much.
Thank you.